So I've put together a presentation. I've put together a few presentations actually, just with questions I often get asked, and I thought it might be easy to answer these questions through a presentation and a little bit of an explanation of what it is. So this question is kind of how do we assess uh, our players' maximal effort levels in terms of how they're performing in training and how can we get the best out of the players from that. And I found in the past that using something called mass or maximal aerobic speed gives the players an insight into what their kind of performance levels are, and that's from a grassroots level or a academy level, whichever way you want to use it. So we're going to speak about that and how we can effectively use it. So just a quick introduction. So what is mass? We're going to look at science, methods, implementation. Why use mass to structure your sessions? How can you use mass scores to develop individual and team training sessions? And how to record mass, and then just a conclusion and session ideas. So ideally I want coaches to learn from these presentations. So I want you to gain more confidence by investigating how to implement mass and understand their findings. We'll analyse the information gained and add this into your training programmes, and then we'll investigate how to utilise mass scores into coaching practice through either small-sided games and mass, or both together as kind of a superset or a roulette kind of scenario. Below I've got a velocity time kind of graph, so this just gives you an idea of where kind of VO2 max or mass happens. So if you look at the blue, that's working at a certain velocity for a shorter period of time, and then as you go down the graph, it's an increase in velocity and also an increase in time, and then there's a point where VO2 max or mass happens, and then also we've got maximum velocity, and then in between that we've got anaerobic speed. It's actually anaerobic speed reserve, and you can structure sessions on that as well, which will be another presentation because that's another question I've had. So just a little bit more about mass then. So what is mass? So mass is the slowest running speed at which the body can consume the maximum amount of oxygen. And I think it's quite contextual to kind of put the next bit in. So tactical and strategic requirements are likely to modulate on-field activities. So that's either in games or training. So depending on what training session or games kind of tactical outlook we've got or what opposition we're playing does have a massive impact on kind of the mass score or the speed at which players are playing at. So it does impact on that as well. And then below I've used a couple of graphs from Dan Baker's research, and basically just looked at different sports, and then we've got the mass scores on there. So the mass maximal speed, which will be an average of what they're covering in the games. They've done a test, and then it's a reference or reference to the paper that they've got that from. So for example, if you look at sport on table 3, we've got Italia Serie A where players are covering or players are at 4.91 metres a second. Again, it's an average. And English Premier League is 4.85, so a little bit slower. But then if you go down the graph and look at Norwegian Junior League, it's 4.36. So this is quite good. I felt this was quite good to put in because you can use these scores, or you can use a group of the scores and get an average, and then kind of create some normative data off the back of it if you've never used maths before. Just appreciate that these have been done predominantly on professionals, so like in academy upwards. So again, if you're using it at grassroots level, you might want to deduct like 10-20% off just to give you a better score, if that makes sense. But also it gives you a way of allowing players to kind of analyse their own performance and scores, and it also allows you to give you relevant progressions as well. And there's some research papers out there that have done like position specific mass scores as well, so you can have a look at certain positions and what you could expect as a mass score from that. So it's quite good in terms of giving players feedback once you've done the mass and you've got their mass score ultimately. So how do we collect their mass score? So there's 3 main tests that we can use now. The bottom test, so the VO2 max measurement on a treadmill, is probably the most unlikely unless you've got access to laboratory and laboratory testing, but it can be done on a treadmill, a bike. Basically put an oxygen mask on, you work at a certain level, and they find out what your maximum VO2 max is, but they also find out where mass happened, so your maximal aerobic speed happened. Again, probably unlikely that you're going to get access to that unless you're studying at a university and you've got access to that. Now the middle one I feel personally is the better, more accessible one, and it's a shuttle test, also known as the Bronco. Basically you set 4 cones up, so you've got a start line, you've got a 20 metre line, 40 metre line, 60 metre line. players go out to 20 back, out to 40 back, out to 60 back, and they do that 5 times, and then you record the score or the time. Obviously, a faster time would indicate a faster, a quicker or a better mass score, working at a higher level. Obviously, a slower time would be a poorer mass score, and the players would be working at a slower pace. And then also we've got, if you've got access to a track, you've got a continuous multi-stage track test where basically we've got a start line, you run the yellow, you walk the white, you run the yellow, walk the white, and you continue doing that for a period of time. Again, not many people have got access to a track, so that's probably another one that's unlikely we're going to do. So, like I say, in my opinion, probably the shuttle test is the better option to complete, because we've all got access to cones and a field. So how to use mass scores effectively. So Clement and Al did a decent paper on looking at children's soccer players, and they found the significant maximal aerobic speed significantly varies across the season. So they did it over a season level. They also found that baseline levels of maximal aerobic speed determine the patterns of change across the season, so you can actually predict whether players have dropped off performance levels or increased in performance levels, and then the season after you can start to kind of, I suppose, periodisation, so periodise the training load or game load, etc. And training load seems to be correlated with variations in maximal aerobic speed. And I've then used a graph from Balaskaran, and this one basically is they did incremental speeds, and then they tested the VO2 from there, and they found out where mass scores happened, etc. So they started at like just past 7, so at 8, and then they found that the VO2 max millilitres per kilogram per minute increased with that, sort of like kind of a linear progression. But this also then indicates that at certain speeds we can find that we can improve the aerobic power a lot better, and this came from Baker and Billett. They found between 100 and 120% mass is the kind of critical factor of improving aerobic power, but then other researchers found that 100% mass is less effective than 120% mass. But I think starting players at maybe 100% mass and then progressively improving or increasing the training load to 120% mass might be a way to go, because then you're offering a little bit of progression, so you're not kind of going all guns blazing, and then you're offering them a little bit of progression within the training load from that. And then Dalal et al. Found when they compared traditional HIIT training with small-sided games, they found that small-sided games were just effective, or just as effective at improving aerobic power when compared to traditional methods. So we can kind of use both methods either adjacent to each other, or kind of as a superset, or whatever method or training method we want to use. We don't have to use one or other, we can kind of use both to get the improvements. So how can we use mass score to structure our sessions? So these are the bullet points are kind of ways that I've used in the past. So one is categorising players using their mass scores. So what we can do is we can have kind of faster groups, lower groups, and then use players to kind of categorically either linearly move up, or if they're not feeling it, move down. So you can kind of create a little bit of a session on different kind of buckets of players who are a little bit quicker, who are a little bit slower. It's used as a motivational tool. So when I've worked in academies, sometimes what we've used is the mass score to put up in the changing rooms, and we've kind of categorised players into buckets, and we've kind of had a lower group, a mid group, another mid group, and then a fast group, and then players are trying to compete with each other to try and improve the mass score, so that gives a little bit of motivation. Categorise intensity levels and or distances. So if you've got access to like GPS systems and stuff, you can categorise intensity levels and distances based off their mass score. It's a little bit harder to do when you haven't got that, but you can use times and distances within small-sided games or around small-sided games that allow players to achieve certain mass levels. You can also predict session speed and distances from that, and you can superset mass, so a mass protocol with technical work, and I've used some examples of that on the right hand side, which I've took from Dan Baker as well. So an example of progression and possible weekly variation of method. So day one would be a volume emphasis, so test mass, 5-minute time trial, 3 minutes at 90% mass, 2 minutes at 40%, times 4 reps times 2. So you do that 4 times, and then you have a rest, and then you do another set. Mixed emphasis, so lower intensity, so 2 minutes at 93% mass, 2 minutes at 40% mass times 5 reps times 2 sets. So these are just kind of running, but again, you can superset running with maybe technical work or a small-sided game, depending on the intensity. And then there's just different variations, and they use different percentage of mass to kind of evoke an adaptation ultimately. So I've got some session ideas that you could potentially use using your mass scores. So you've got a Tabata method. So this is purely just running, but in the past I've supersetted this with maybe technical work with a coach, or you've taken the technical work, or put this into a small-sided game. So you've got a Tabata method. So basically you're working at 120% mass. So you might have 4 different groups who've all got a different 120% mass distance. Again, that's calculated on a calculation that I've got on my website. So if you sign up to my website, you'll get a free calculator for that. And you do 20 seconds on, and then they have 10 seconds of complete rest, and then you repeat that for 4 minutes. So every time the timer goes, you blow a whistle or you shout, and they go again for that distance. So you'll have a group of players covering, 75 metres. You might have another group covering 80 metres, another group covering 85 metres, depending on the speed. You can do an incremental, so you can do 100%. So they'll cover a certain distance, then you can do 120%, then 130%. We've done this before where we've done 15 seconds on, 15 seconds off, and 2 minutes at each level. So they'll do 2 minutes at 100%, 2 minutes at 120, 2 minutes at 130. And then I've also used a superset, which you just have to be careful on the player load on this one, because it's quite intense. So you get players working at anything from 120 to 130%, and then once they've done that protocol, so 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off, they repeat that for 2 minutes, and then they go into a 3-minute small-sided game. So as you can appreciate, it's 5 minutes of hard work. So normally your rest period is an inactive rest for maybe 2 to 3 minutes, and then get them into a little bit of technical work and then go again. But like I say, it is quite intense, that one. But it just gives you an idea how you can kind of manipulate the session to get the best out of the players. So significant improvements in aerobic fitness and match performance in both groups of soccer players when comparing traditional methods with small-sided games. So that were from Impellizzeri, I hope I've pronounced that right. And they found, again, comparing traditional methods, and there's a few research papers that have done that, where they've kind of used a small-sided game protocol and compared it to a traditional method, and they've found kind of significant improvements in both methods for fitness and match performance. And then I've just used the graph from kind of that, and again it's kind of depicting the kind of same intensity zones and intensity levels, just kind of, I suppose, supporting that we can use small-sided games alongside traditional methods. There'll be people out there, or some academics or coaches going, well, yeah, I believe in a more realistic approach maybe. So trying to use small-sided games and either coupling that with traditional methods, or using one or other but changing it within the training session, because we've all done it before, where we've been kind of flogged in sessions and we're just constantly running, where we're working with footballers who want a ball at the feet. So sometimes a small-sided game is a better way to trying to get that load into them, and a more effective motivational way as well. And then just to summarise, so mass, slowest running speed at which the body can consume at maximum amount of oxygen uptake. Tactical and strategic requirements are likely to modulate on-field activities. So depending on what kind of small-sided game you're playing, or tactical tactics you're using within games, or opponents you're playing, etc., etc., it can modulate what kind of the mass score is. Mass can be used to determine load and fatigue, so it's a good way of kind of looking at the intensity and volume level of your sessions. And significant improvements in aerobic fitness and match performance can be influenced through traditional and small-sided game methods. And then what I've done here is just kind of highlighted a few groups. So you've got groups in minutes, so 4 to 4:15 would be a fast group, 4:16 to 4:35 would be medium, group 3 would be 4:36, 4:55, group 4, 4:56. Plus, this is on professional players, and then it's worked out your 100% mass, 120% mass from there. And then finally, just subscribe and sign up. So head over to my website. Again, I've got loads of free content on there, so it makes sense it's literally an email address and a password. And there's a free mass score calculator on there. So if you want to give the Bronco a try, depending on what level you're coaching at, give the Bronco a try and then put all the player scores in the mass calculator and then try and give it a whirl on some of the sessions that we've covered in this kind of seminar or presentation. Don't forget to subscribe to YouTube channel, another kind of social media platform I try and use to give you loads of free resources. Again, I want to serve coaches, I want to support coaches, and again, if you look on my website, I do some mentorship programs with coaches, and we've had some real good success with coaches working on the physical corner, but also looking at kind of skill acquisition and how they can support players and serve players a little bit better, and using more engaging training protocols, etc. But really appreciate you listening. I'll not babble on any further, and obviously stay tuned for a few more presentations which I'll throw on the YouTube channel as well. Alright, peace out. Cheers.